There we go. Okay. Well, the meeting is called to order now at 2:49 and 23 seconds, according to my watch. This afternoon, we're going to be dealing with the Auditor General's report on collecting government revenue. We're going to start the process. And we have invited the Honorable Deputy Governor once again. It's the importance we place on you, that we keep calling you back. But we're starting at the top and working our way down. But thank you for coming, and carry our condolences to your staff who have to fill in for you and do the extra work while you're down here. So we'll invite the Auditor General to make his opening statement, and in keeping with the new trend, you're going to tell us what good has been done and then say, but this is left to done, instead of what bad is being done, but they're trying to do this.
Yeah, something along that line.
There you go.
Maybe however or two will be in there.
Oh, yeah, okay, all right. As long as you stick to however and don't get to on the other hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of Public Accounts Committee, officials from the Ministry of Finance, and ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, good afternoon. Again, I have with me today Mr. Martin Rubin, the audit director responsible for the performance audits and who led the audit work supporting the collecting of government revenues, audit report that you'll be reviewing this afternoon. Thank you again for the opportunity to make some opening remarks. The collection of government revenues in the Cayman Islands is a very important function of the government. The government generated about $650 million of revenue in 2013-14 from a multitude of sources. 95% of revenues are authorized by legislation such as custom duties, immigration fees, work permit fees, etc. The remaining 5% of revenues, which involves the sales of goods and services, are authorized annually through the approval of the government's budget documents. Over the last 5 years, revenues have grown by approximately $175 million, or about 36%. With this significant growth, the government has had the responsibility to ensure that the revenues are not only collected in accordance with the laws and regulations, but that they are collected efficiently and effectively. We recognize the challenges government faces in carrying out this important function under these conditions. We address this topic because the effective collection of government revenues ensures that it can have the resources necessary to deliver the programs and services expected by the residents of the Cayman Islands, and that the way it is collected is done fairly and consistently. Therefore, the objective of this audit was to determine whether the Cayman Islands government is adequately collecting its revenues in order to meet its own objectives. This audit focused on the most significant revenue sources for government, as well as a few others that we considered important to the success of government's operations. In total, we reviewed 18 revenue sources from government, assessing how well government is collecting the amounts that should be collected according to the laws and policies of the government, as well as the efficiency by which they were being collected. In reviewing the 18 revenue sources, we essentially looked at 74% of the total amount collected. In addition to conducting a general review of the management control framework, assessing the systems involved in the collection of revenue, and reviewing a sample of revenue transactions, we also carried out an in-depth review of government's practices for granting revenue waivers of all kinds. By carrying out this wide scope of audit work, we were able to cover most of the significant activities associated with government's responsibilities to efficiently and effectively collect its revenues. Government is generally doing a good job of collecting the revenues it is mandated to collect. We found that government is collecting the revenues it should be collecting according to the laws, as well as authorities provided to it in the budgetary process. There were some exceptions noted that we identified in the report, including an overly complex arrangement for the determination of work permit fees, as well as some issues with collecting duties at the wrong rates. Overall, though, I'd like to say that our audit found that government is collecting its revenues according to its laws. However, we found that the government is missing many opportunities to save money by doing the job of collecting revenues more efficiently. While we did not quantify the savings to government, we identified several examples in the report where the collection of revenues could be carried out using less resources and less time. As well, the government practices could lead to the additional risk of errors occurring due to the additional steps being taken in the processing of revenue transactions. For example, we found government departments operating revenue collection in silos. They established revenue collection practices and systems for their own department, which resulted in lost opportunities for efficiency. Many of the revenue systems we reviewed operate outside government's accounting system, IRIS, and don't have any automated interfaces that could have been easily implemented. Instead of automated accounting routines, accountants have to prepare and post manual accounting entries, taking time away from other work they could be doing. We found some systems with similar information in them, but operating separately. Again, an opportunity to become more efficient and save the government money. Another obvious area where the collection of revenues could be more efficient is the customer interface on the main floor of the government administration building. There are 12 to 15 wickets operating with each one staffed by different departments and operating at different times. Observing their operations, many of the individuals are idle for long periods of time. Again, opportunities for efficiencies have not been pursued. The requirement for customers to visit more than one wicket to pay government fees when they visit the building results in more time being spent by the customer and diminished customer experience. The report includes our observations that government lacks systems for risk management and performance measurement for the collection of revenues. These findings have been made in previous reports relating to other government functions such as procurement and the management of major capital projects. These important management practices ensure that government operates efficiently and effectively and provides assurance to senior management that they are achieving the results expected by the Legislative Assembly. These frameworks are fundamental to good public sector management, and we have again identified these important deficiencies in this area of government's operations. When collecting revenues, government officials can waive the collection of revenues in certain situations. We expect government to be managing this process very carefully, given the risks associated with this kind of activity. We found that government officials have not been acting in accordance with the Public Management and Finance Law, whereby proper systems and practices are required to be in place for the management of public resources. We're surprised to find little in the way of policies, procedures, and practices around the assessment of requests by the public for waiving of duties. In carrying out our audit work, we were only given supporting documentation for 70% of the sample we chose for review. For those waivers which we were provided documentation, it was unclear in many cases why the waivers were granted. Government doesn't track how much it grants in waivers, leaving it unable to provide proper financial reports required by its own accounting policies. We are unable to determine how much revenue government had agreed to waive over the last 5 years. In the absence of that information, there has been no transparency or accountability for the decisions made by government officials and politicians who may have acted improperly by forgiving certain revenues. No one will ever know because senior government officials failed to discharge their duties under the PMFL. In responding to our recommendation that government establish proper revenue waiver process, government says it will take until December 2016 to rectify this very critical deficiency, continuing to risk government resources and leaving the revenue collection operations open to abuse. This, in my opinion, is unacceptable. Since issuing the report, the Legislative Assembly has passed amendments to the PMFL requiring Cabinet to approve all revenue waivers. The amendment contradicts the effective role Cabinet plays in the governance framework described in the Constitution, reduces the transparency and accountability for these types of transactions, and effectively politicizes an administrative decision-making process that, in our opinion, is essential to the effective operation of government. In conclusion, for the most part, as I had mentioned previously, government is collecting the revenue it is due when legislation requires it to do so. In certain areas, as stated in the report, we say they are doing a pretty good job. I hope that the government revisits its decision and manages revenue waivers in a more transparent and accountable fashion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You say in your executive summary that there's an absence of policies and procedures for processing revenue waivers or concessions, and that they're granted in an inconsistent and transparent manner. Are any waivers granted here that are not authorized by the statute that establishes the fee in the first place? I'll give you an example. Under customs, under the customs law, the financial secretary is authorized by the law to offer a particular waivers for customs duty. And I don't remember whether the law specifies the instances of when that can be done. But like, for instance, for churches and stuff like that, right? The question I'm asking, did you find where waivers were given, authorized, that were not supported by statute authority to do so?
Let Mr. Rubin answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In answering that question, we couldn't tell.
Okay.
And that's why we have made it absolutely clear. First of all, 30% of the waivers that we picked for samples were not there was no documentation provided for it. So we wouldn't know whether or not there was they were in accordance or granted in accordance with the laws as you decided. Okay. And with regard to the other 70%, there was, at times, as we've indicated in our report, there was no indication as to why the basis for the waiver being granted, under which law it was granted, so we would not know that either.
And you would expect that the development and introduction of these procedures and policies would address exactly that, so that any waiver that was given should be supported by statutory authority, and the process by which it was applied for and which it was granted should be clearly delineated. And then you didn't find that?
No.
Okay.
If I could just go back to yesterday's conversation, though, that we had with your committee, we discussed the fact that that there is now the beginnings of a leadership in the financial function, and that it's being exercised in a way that we would hope continues. This particular area of financial management is a critical area, and what we have highlighted in our report is that this should be across the government demanded that each ministry implement the kind of controls, which would include the adequate policies, procedures, and the actual practices to ensure, as you have stated, that any granting of a revenue waiver is only done in accordance with the law, but also in accordance with any policies that the government should decide to implement during the course of its operations. For example, if they've, in further to the law, for example, if they decide that there should be certain criteria whereby a certain waiver would be granted. So that's where we are. Our report is trying to bring to light.
FS, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just to provide, again, the committee with some information to let the committee know what happens in particular in the Ministry of Finance. I'll start with import duty waivers, Mr. Chairman. Under the customs law, the customs law gives the cabinet the ability to waive import duties. Cabinet, in turn, the current cabinet, has given the Minister for Finance a delegation that he can waive import duties up to a maximum of $20,000. And if the request coming in to him is for a waiver in excess of $20,000, then the Minister has to take it back to Cabinet. With respect to planning fees, waiver of planning fees, we do get quite a lot of those being requested as well in the Ministry of Finance. And again, Cabinet has granted the Minister for Finance limited ability to waive planning fees up to an amount of $5,000. If it goes beyond that, it's referred back to Cabinet for approval. Mr. Chair, under the stamp duty law, the Minister for Finance actually has unlimited ability to waive stamp duty, but he does not exercise that unlimited ability. He adopts a quite conservative approach in that waivers in excess of $20,000, the Minister will refer it back to Cabinet. Those that are under $20,000, he will deal with himself. So that is the position with the Ministry of Finance. And in discussion at lunchtime with Ministry of Finance staff, it is the case that at present, our knowledge of waivers throughout the government is fairly restricted to what we do in finance ourselves or what we get informed of via Cabinet, because there are a few instances in which a waiver is requested by a ministry portfolio other than the Ministry of Finance. Cabinet makes a decision, and then Cabinet directs that the Ministry of Finance shall keep records of the waivers. So that sometime occurs. I haven't had a discussion as yet, Mr. Chair, but I'm willing to do so, to say to the Minister for Finance, if he wishes to discuss in Cabinet that all waivers being requested of Cabinet that are granted by Cabinet, whether Cabinet wants those recorded by the Minister of Finance so that you have essentially one depository for information relating to waivers throughout the government. I can have that conversation. I haven't had it as yet, sir.
That, I understand clearly the issue with customs law. The law authorizes Cabinet to waive certain fees. And I would assume if Cabinet has delegated a certain portion to that down to the Minister, that the law allows Cabinet or the Minister. We just made some changes to the planning and development law recently, last year, or the year before, where the Minister can waive certain planning fees. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but not all the planning fees. In the case where the Cabinet is waiving fees, I would assume that Cabinet is only waiving fees for which there is statutory provision for them to do so. Because I can't think of, and I'm subject to you, DG, what authority Cabinet would use to waive fees that were not authorized by the very statute that created the fee in the first place, which is where I would think one would find the ability to waiver it. Should be in that same piece of legislation. Are you aware of any instances where that happens?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As far as I'm aware, Cabinet has been waiving the fees in accordance with the established laws. I'm not aware of any exceptions to that.
Okay. Because if we look at, if we can believe what's reported in the press, fees to potential developers reach into the millions and millions of dollars. I think I seek subject to correction, but I think the latest one for the hotel in Beach Bay was, what was it, somewhere around 80 million or something, fees that was being waived. Now, I can't, when, to you, Mr. FS, in those instances when Cabinet, and we will assume that the law, and we'll ask other people that come after you, whether the law, because we've invited the collector of customs, other people. that the law authorizes them to do it. In an instance where fees of that magnitude are granted, what enforcement mechanism is put in place to monitor? Because there's all kind of rumors on the street that the government will grant a church, as an example, a couple of $1,000 in waivers for construction. But people believe that that is extended to the minister's house and to some cases apartments, right? What mechanism does the Ministry of Finance have in place to ensure that none of these waivers are taken advantage of? Again, if it's custom duty based on building material, is there a mill list submitted with the application to which customs can refer when I bring in a container and I produce a letter that says I have a waiver for these goods, that they can go through the invoice and say, yeah, every item on this is included in your application? Because short of that kind of ability to monitor, I can't see how we're going to control it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What you just said towards the end, Mr. Chair, is quite frequently a request of ours. If a request for a waiver is received without an accompanying invoice, that becomes first and foremost an additional piece of information that we do ask for. And so we place great emphasis on putting the Customs Department, if we're talking about an import duty waiver, in a position where there is something that it can objectively look at and compare with the requests coming in. Mr. Chair, going back earlier to a more general situation, how the waivers are enforced, quite frequently the decisions coming out of Cabinet to grant a waiver will come with some conditions or restrictions. And normally it is frequently now that the project, for example, has to start by a certain date. And if it does not start by a certain date, the waiver falls away and goes to nil and void. The more difficult conditions or requests accompanying that decision is that the recipient is encouraged, is endeavored, is told to use as much Caymanian labor as possible. And that's, I think, a bit more difficult to enforce. And so those typically are what we see. There has to be a listing of the materials that the waiver is to take effect on, and so that it is possible to essentially tick off between what is coming in and what Cabinet has approved. There's a time restriction on it, and there's often the noble requirement for as much Caymanian labor to be used on the project as possible. One quick point, Mr. Chair, not connected necessarily with this, the customs tariff law, the previous law, actually contained a schedule in it that did give churches and educational institutions an ability to bring into the islands construction materials, etc., duty-free. That previous tariff law, customs tariff law, was then superseded by the one that we have now, and that particular import duty provision for churches and educational institutions, schools, was not carried forward. So a church now does not have the ability to say to the government, under the customs tariff law, I'm entitled to have construction materials, building materials brought in duty-free. That's not currently the case. the Minister for Finance has had at least 2 or 3 meetings with churches. There is a regime in place as to what has to be submitted in order to seek a waiver, and so he has had meetings with schools as well, so they were informed of those changes. Mr. Chair, if I've missed anything, please let me know, sir.
Yes, one question on the feel-good provision of using as much Caymanian labor as possible. Is that accompanied by any directive to immigration or to the chief officer responsible for immigration not to grant permits in certain categories unless certain things are done? Or is this just left there as a feel-good provision?
Mr. Chair, thank you, sir. I've often seen where the linkage is made with the Caymanian labor aspect, a linkage made to the NWDA, that they assist in the process, and the Ministry of Labor assist in trying to determine the extent to which the Caymanian labor aspect of the waiver is being honored. I can't say I've recall seeing a linkage to work permit fees, work permit applications being granted. I don't recall that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for acknowledging me, Mr. Chair. In his opening remarks, the Acting Auditor General discussed our concerns about the current process for granting duty waivers. I don't know if we didn't say the words, but maybe we're having a discussion here about all the intricacies of how you grant waivers in the absence of a policy framework, of procedures, of clear criteria, of even having politicians involved in discussions and in the decision-making process. I'd like to just put it plain and simple. I've written it down. We believe, our office believes, that the way that revenue waivers are managed today in their entirety, that they are open for abuse and corruption at the very highest level. And unless government decides to put in place the robust procedures that they have for other areas of financial management, we believe that this will just be open for abuse going forward. We have seen it. We have seen it in terms of when we did an audit of the NRA road deal, in a sense that as part of that agreement there were revenue waivers involved, and it created problems for one government handing over to another government because no one knew about the extent to which those waivers could impact other aspects of revenue collection. The bottom line is we could be talking at great length about the procedures that need to be put in place for doing the wrong thing. But you have to do, if you're going to do it, you have to do the right thing, but you have to do it in the right way in order to accomplish what we believe is the intent of the Public Management and Finance Law, which requires that there be proper financial controls in place for the financial transactions of government. And revenue waivers are, in fact, they are financial transactions of government. And
I agree with you entirely. The whole purpose of my line of question is to impress on the DG how bad it is, right? Because they're coming to him now, right? Because the conversations we had yesterday in relation to the responsibility of the civil service being the enforcement of the legislation, even in the absence of directives from the political arm. Because I think it is I am very concerned that some of the reports that I see, that waivers that are being granted from cabinet at the highest level are in fact not supported by statute provisions for that law, which is why I asked the question, and I think the hotel tax was one that was brought up. I think some of the planning fees that have been agreed to be waived for some of these developments, right? I believe fall in that category too. So what we need from the civil service is for the civil service to put in place what Mr. Rubin is talking about, so that if the politicians try to waive fees, there is a process that they have to follow, which is supported by a policy, which is supported by legislation in the statute that created the fee in the first place. Because I can't imagine that we would put in the PMFL law, for instance, that the cabinet has carte blanche to waive any fee to any amount it wants. I don't think that exists today. And that's certainly not where I think the committee would want us to go. We're not saying that there shouldn't be waivers, but we want to be assured that the civil service are accepting the responsibility that goes along. And we've invited the Director of Customs and the other heads to help push that along, because I agree with the auditor that I believe this is a very important piece of the puzzle that we have to get right. And the other thing is that, to you, FS, is there anywhere in the annual budget documents that a fee, the total waivers for the year, are presented, which would give people like me an opportunity to see how much revenue is given away when we're talking about we don't have resources to pay poor relief?
Mr. Chair, no, sir. The annual documents do not contain such information. Periodically, as you would know, sir, what we do get is parliamentary questions asking for that information, and then the answer is provided as a result of a parliamentary question. But it's not a feature of the annual budget document.
And to refer back to the one that is in the document, which are still under review, the planning land stuff yesterday in the health city, which is another example of where we have a huge amount of fees being waived. Is there any method used now by the Minister of Finance after these fees have been granted? Because I would assume that the fees that are granted is somehow related to the projected business model, i.e., in the case of Health City, that they were going to be doing thousands and thousands of people a year, and therefore these people are going to be spending money in the Cayman Islands, and we would be getting import duties on the food that they consume and all of this stuff to replace the funds. Because I think that agreement, it says up to $800 million or something like that. Right? Because based on the projections from that particular entity that were tabled in this House, where they were going to be 1 year into operation, 2 years into operation, and are way below what the projection was going to be. What I want to get to is the government minded that these things need to be evaluated after the fact to make sure that the country is getting the benefit that we were told we were going to get, why we offered this concession to get the business started in the first place.
Mr. Chair, obviously it's a difficult one for me to answer. I can't see.
Is there any? I don't want a specific answer for that one. What I'm looking for is there any process currently in the Ministry of Finance that causes a review of these fees? Because a lot of these fees are multi-year. You know, if you grant it in this year budget, next year does the revenue management unit, for instance, look at the concessions that were given to Company A, which were based on projections that Company A would produce XYZ in revenue in government from other sources, right? To see whether that is happening and whether you hold them to account because they are not performing as to the agreement they gave government.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, currently there's no such assessment mechanism that is being done along the lines that you've spoken about, sir.
Can we get an undertaking that in the process of developing these policies and procedures that are now missing, and hopefully we'll get those done in the near future, that there's some kind of after the fact evaluation of the person getting the benefit performance to see whether we should continue to grant it? Because some of these things are, in the case of Health City, it's a 50-year with an option to renew, if I recall correctly, commitment. Mr. Rubin.
Mr. Miller, I think your question is right on, but it should go further than just revenue waivers. It should go for all expenditures.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're asking for in terms of performance reporting. So if there's a benefit to be derived from a transfer payment, I understand that the new policy is going to require that a benefit be shown and whether or not that benefit was actually achieved. There's another important aspect that is even more fundamental with regard to the control of these revenue waivers. They could be given over a 5-year period, but the question is, were they actually managed in accordance with the original intent over those 5 years? There is no follow-up. What we found was that, for example, at Health City, no one was managing that. So we don't know whether or not the intent, as you point out, of that agreement was actually carried out.
Yeah.
And that's in the National Land Development audit.
I asked a question of the Minister of Health last sitting, who was monitoring the Health Cities agreement, and he gave me a whole list of people and departments who were monitoring it. And I just telling you what I was told. Most of the departments that he listed here, I knew, right, were in no position to monitor what needed to be monitored, right? Because they're not even monitoring in-house, but monitored anywhere else.
We'll be giving the Legislative Assembly a report on the management of healthcare, which will include, for example, we're looking at those agreements to see if they are being followed up. So we'll hopefully give you an independent view on that.
That will be interesting. That one I will read in my sleep. Oh yeah. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, through you, and this is to the Financial Secretary. In the report, obviously there are discussions around systems and risk and inefficiencies and collection, etc. In your role, FS, do you ever, I guess you and your team, ever come up with best case solutions? Say you get this report and you see some inadequacies in the system. Is it part of your mandate to put together memos, notes, or seek out meetings with the deputy governor or the minister of finance to say, well, read this report and here are my suggestions or our suggestions for a way forward? Or is that always top-down driven?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. My sort of immediate thoughts on the scenario just put to me is that quite often when there are papers, requests for revenue waivers, in particular cabinet papers, that the Minister of Finance does actually get asked to provide comments in cabinet papers requesting waivers of revenue, and quite often we would make the comment that the effect of the waiver would be to reduce government revenues and to reduce its expected cash at the end of the year. And I should also say from earlier as well, Mr. Chair, that often a frequent occurrence now is that rather than some revenue sources being waived and written and forgiven completely, deferrals of payments are often the way to go now, more so than writing off. And I'm thinking particularly of stamp duty transactions, large stamp duty transactions. It's often that the government may say you don't have to pay today, but sometime later you do have to pay and specify that date. So that's a common position now as well. But
you register a charge or something on the property.
Yes.
You don't want the writs occurrence again.
Yes, that has happened recently as well, Mr. Chair. But I think that is that's my best answer I can give to Member Connolly, that the other ministries' portfolios in making requests come to us and seek our responses, and quite often they are complicated, and we do try to take our time to give our best possible reply to it.
Thanks for the answer, FS. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me again. But so when we talk about, when we see in this report things like the tourism accommodation tax and kind of the possible leaving revenue on the table, we talk about the no central kind of collection system where you can go and just pay all your bills at one time. I guess what I'm looking for is who gives the strategic kind of guidance and checks the systems to say, well, this is what we should be doing, or this is what we could be doing. This is what we've seen as best practice, or is that driven through the Auditor General's office through the audits and then them coming up with suggestions, or who in government are the people or the department or whomever that kind of just sit down and critically analyze systems and say, this could be a money saver, this could be a time saver, this could be, we could get more revenue or higher revenue if we kind of, this is something that I guess I lived in when I was in the private sector. I was a director in companies and I had to go get a police clearance fee for every fund that I was on. That would take 2 days basically, because you go in, you wait 45 minutes, you get in line, you pay your fee, you take the passport again for the fifth time that month, they photocopy it, then they say, okay, you need to come back tomorrow and get it. And I can't remember what the fee was, $25-30. I would have paid double if I could have just gotten it and that same day or even done it electronically or something, because for me, at $550 an hour, to sit in the line for an hour to pay $25, it's things like that. I was just wondering, who looks at those things, who engages with private sector or other sectors and really just kind of tweaks the system rather than going, well, this is the system, this is how we do it. And I'm just trying to find out where that function or that that role is in the current government scenario.
Mr. Monson?
Mr. Chairman, while the FS is discussing there, what I want to say about this entire matter in terms of what the Auditor General was saying about the number of different windows at the government administration building is that I am leading the e-government steering committee, and that group is currently now looking across the civil service as to what functions we can deliver better by using technology. So, like what the member said in terms of police records, we're looking at how we can, the relevant systems can be talking to each other. I mean, one of the biggest complaints I get is that, you go to the police record office, you get your police record, you then go over to the passport office, you have to pay again, you submit that. Why is it that we just can't go to the passport office, pay them the fee for the police record, they search the police database? It seems like a no-brainer. So these are the things that we're looking at across government as to how we can make the systems better. I mean, my long-term vision for the civil service is that we will have systems in place that no one needs to come to government to pay a fee. I mean, you should be able to pay all your fees online using your smartphone. I mean, that's really where we need to get to. But there's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen to do that. We want to make sure that we have the relevant platforms, that all of the systems are speaking to each other, and of course, the report that you're going to deal with next about cybersecurity, if we're going to have that type of connectability with all our systems, whereas if you could hack into one of them, you then get into the entire government network, we have to be absolutely certain that we have put the necessary firewalls and top-of-the-line IT security systems to make sure that they cannot be penetrated. So it is something that we're looking at. We have regular meetings. Hopefully we'll be able to announce some big news very shortly about some of the departments that we're going to be dealing with. But sir, yes, I believe that not only will that make the government more efficient in terms of better customer service, but we'll be able to collect more government revenue in a timely manner because it'll be easier for people to pay that. And I think some of the reasons why people don't pay timely now is because of the hassle it takes to give us money, which we are not a good way of doing business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I was just conferring with the Accountant General, and he'll answer an aspect of it. But I would say to Member Connolly that there isn't a dedicated unit within government that does that exclusively. If that type of analysis is occurring, it's occurring within each individual ministry portfolio. But there isn't a central agency, central set of people that is doing this analysis. It occurs within each individual ministry portfolio. Just by way of simple example, not so much on the revenue side, but I can certainly think of on the expenditure side. The Ministry of Finance controls the healthcare expenditures for seamen and veterans, and something as simple as checking the death announcements, which is pretty bad thing to be talking about, but
It's real.
something as simple as checking the death announcements in the newspapers against the register of persons who were receiving health care from the government as a seaman or a veteran wasn't done until fairly recently. We had a new staff member take control of that area, and that is now a regular.
But you see that this
And expenditures have actually gone down as a result of that.
right. This is again where I think the civil service is falling down, and we politicians are getting the blame because you can't bury anybody in the Cayman Islands without a death certificate. That death certificate is granted by one of your departments in the Ministry of Finance, Registrar of Companies. It has to be a simple system for the registrar to, at the end of every month, when you pay pensions on a monthly basis, or whatever the day is that you're going to cut checks or payment, the day before that, to send you an email automatically from their system listing the people that died in the last month. You know? Yeah, but I know, again, you know, I was raised with lamplight and you only had one phone the whole district and all that. But this day and age, the computer systems in government should be able to, and another example is pensioners. I spend a lot of time in December and January signing this affidavit from pensioners that they're still alive as a member of the representative, right? Now, again, the government should be able to manage that entirely in-house because the records are there. It's just a matter of making sure that the record goes to the right people. You know, because, again, it's not impossible for somebody, because it happened in the Cayman, I can tell you it happened there. He wasn't dead, but he wasn't entitled to it, but he got a justice of the peace to sign it, right? For somebody to sign a form that's saying the person's still alive. And is there, the question again, is there any cross-reference from that kind of documentation to the government issuing of death certificates? Because to the best of my knowledge, I mean, seriously, you can't bury anybody in Cayman unless you have a death certificate from government. And you can't take nobody out of here if the government don't give you a death certificate to let you in somewhere else. And to you, Mr. DG, and I'm not being disrespectul by calling you.
No, sir,
DG.
not at all.
I did that on radio today too, and I apologize. But the wickets downstairs, and maybe the FSR, is there any particular reason why each one of those can't collect any fee that is due from government and account for it on their computer system, and it goes to whoever is entitled to get it?
Mr. Chairman, I strongly support that, and I think it's be very convenient for the public to be able to make any payment for any government department at any government kiosk or booth in that manner. So you can come to government building and pay a customs bill or even a water authority and any authority bill, HSA bill and so on. It'd be very good for customer service as well. It's something you need to take on board. Well, it's something that we have taken on board, and we're working with e-government to get to that point. E-government is currently quite swamped with a number of these.
Let's do it manually before we put it in the e-government, because you know that old saying, well, the garbage in, garbage out. But if we should be able to do this next week.
Well,
manually.
It's a bit more because we need to look at the business processes in the background as well. We need to ensure that the people have the right access, the right level of access, and so on. And as well as we need to have specific training for these individuals, because there's so many different revenue lines the government collects. They need to be able to ensure that they're booking it to the right place and that those funds are distributed to the right department and government account. Because we have a multi-org system where each ministry has their own set of bank accounts and so on, we need to ensure that it goes to the right place and so on. So it's a business process that needs to be looked at as well. But it's definitely something that we have been looking at, and we bring it up at a CFO meeting each month. Going back for a moment to Mr. Connolly's comment about looking at the revenue and the changes, any kind of improvements, as the FS has said, there's no entity that does this centrally. However, we do draw from the audit reports and so on as ways of finding improvement. Obviously, that's not where we want to be. The Ministry of Finance is taking a strong lead at this time, given the support of the Deputy Governor in working with CFOs and Chief Officers, and we'll be setting direction on these things and encouraging CFOs to provide any kind of insight they have in their specific areas of how we can improve their operations. So this is something we'll be bringing up at the CFO meetings each month, and how to improve revenue collection as well as internal controls, because obviously quite a bit of this report is relating to internal controls and the framework around collection of revenue. So it's something that we're doing in-house and looking at our business processes and our internal controls to ensure that we're getting that right, and we're protecting revenue and improving where we can, not only from the area of collection of revenue, but also from a customer service perspective. Because obviously revenue, you'll more than likely collect more if you make it easier for customers to pay, for example. So those kind of things we're working on doing, as well as we'd like to get to the point of being able to take payments online and so on, just making things as easy as possible for our customers. And so those are kind of some of the things that we're looking at doing. But the Ministry of Finance is taking the lead and setting the direction of these things.
Yeah, Eugene.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in the audit findings, number 22, they found that there were 6 samples that the rate of duty had been incorrectly transcribed. Has there been anything done to correct this? It's on page 9.
Mr. Chair, I was just conferring with Mr. Rubin from the audit office. When the work was done, he was told, Mr. Chair, that he was not told whether the 6 particular items were going to be pursued or not. I think applying common sense, Mr. Chair, unless the amounts were huge, there were payments obviously done at an incorrect rate, but they were done in good faith on the basis of what was in the law at the time, albeit those rates were wrong. The customer, the member of the public who made the payment would have done so in good faith, and like I say, unless there's significant amounts involved, I would think that the matter would be left alone. But I will ask Customs if they have a dollar figure with respect to the difference between the rates and what was the correct amount.
Mr. Connolly.
Mr. Chairman, through you, again, this is to, I guess, the financial secretary. You see in the report too that there are some 5,000 work permit fees, and the Auditor General talks about the streamlining of that system because of the complexity, because of the mistakes, because of some things just don't make common sense. If you're one designation in one category has a different fee from that. What can you tell us has been done, if anything, about just reviewing that system and maybe even simplifying it? Have a professional standard, a non-professional standard, entry-level, management, ownership. I mean, things like that. It could have ranges where you could, in my mind, just kind of, playing at my mind's eye, it's something that could be very simple, yet not reduce the revenue that you're taking, because you can have broader categories with a kind of range of payments. I mean, but I'm just trying to figure out what, if anything, has been done since this report, and whether or not there are things contemplated in the immigration law vis-a-vis the work permit fee structure based on these.
I think we have Mr. Howell and Mr. Bruce outside, the chief officer. Maybe they could come in now, and then they can answer the question. Mr. Sergeant at Arms, are you around? But could you bring in Mr. Howell and Mr. Bruce Smith, please?
Mr. Chairman, while they come in, just to give a bit of background as to how we got here. Many years ago, before this new fee schedule was put in, we basically had 4 fee categories in the immigration regulations, which was unskilled, skilled, managerial, professional. And that caused a myriad of problems because, of course, nobody wanted to be in the professional. Everyone said they were either managerial or skilled. So, and this was an initiative that I led. We said, okay, let us basically dump all of the occupations that we have in our systems now into the fee schedule so there can be no ambiguity about what the fees are. Now, what should have happened, and I don't think what has happened, and the officials can complain, is that we should be constantly updating our regulations as new occupations come on board. And I don't think we have done that. But if certainly someone could come up with a better way of doing it that brings more certainty, I'm sure the team would be open to it. What I would like to see is basically a computer system where you'd simply put in your occupation and there's some behind-the-scene calculation and it spits you out the fee, so that when you walk down to immigration, you have your check in hand, and that it is done that way. Whether that's possible, we'll have to look, but that's just the background as to how we got to where we are today.
But thanks, DJ, because that's very illustrative. And but we know that there are cases now people shop for fees, right? So they see all these categories. That it just gives them more options.
Nobody hires a mason anymore. They're mason helpers.
Exactly.
10%.
And if you have broader categorizations, I think in professional, non-professional, and other or whatever, and just 3 fees on each category, each topping or heading. And I mean, I'm generalizing. I'm just kind of throwing it out there. But you people get caught then in these wider scope, and surely the credentials would then match up if they're saying, "Oh, I'm a manager," but they're like a CPA accountant. With that package that they had given immigration in the first place, somebody could double check to see that they're not shopping for these fees. But I mean, I just say that 5,000 jumped out at me, and that seemed to be a lot of reviewing for an administrator or a board or whatever when it comes to that, because again, in other places you see like broad categories of a job. So if you're an accountant at whatever level, that's an accountant here, there, and everywhere. Maybe
we have the same fee for the same profession, but depending on where they're working.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I'll defer to the acting chief and the deputy chief officer here. The acting chief officer. But I take the point, and I think we now need to look at it and get it right based on what is obtaining at the moment.
I think the question that Mr. Connolly was asking the chief officer or the chief immigration officer is, do you believe that a review of the fees in an effort to reduce them into broad categories is something that is viable or something you have given consideration to reduce the errors that are happening in what's being paid charged?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wesley Howell, Acting Chief Officer, Ministry of Home Affairs. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to say that the ministry and the department, along with our colleagues from the NWDA and a couple of the private sector recruitment agencies, have actually looked at the work permit processes. Our end goal was to move to a system where we increase the transparency of work permits for Caymanians. So we list work permits that were coming up on expiration 6 months before they were up. We would then allow for a single job placement board with the government where all the jobs would be listed and all the job seekers would go and be notified when jobs are listed within their areas that they're seeking employment. And then allow for electronic submission of work permit applications.
I'm glad to hear all that information because I hadn't heard about it before, but that's the question is, right now we have 5,000
Yes, sir.
work permit fees. Whether your ministry has given any consideration to collapsing that down
Absolutely.
to about 10.
So I've taken a long road
Maintaining
around.
the same revenue. Yeah.
I've taken a long road around,
Oh,
but
okay.
the work that was done for that process also took into consideration that we couldn't go with a self-service portal with the complicated fees that we have. So there was a view of simplifying the occupations based on ISCO code groupings, that folks would choose the nearest matching occupation group that they would slot into. So if you were a senior manager, then there's a slot for a senior manager. It doesn't matter if it's senior manager, HR, or so those sorts of decisions were being made to simplify the code so that we could then pick and would do an escrow payment system that would take it through. But we couldn't go live with what we have now in terms of several hundred different combinations of codes and fees.
No, thank you for that response, Acting CEO, because I mean it just it is very apparent that that system can be abused by employers, employees, and you know that's where corruption and other things come in. And again, surely as part of good governance in general, you want to kind of mitigate those things. And you know, my whole motto in life is keep it simple, stupid, and you know, you don't kind of get into some of these, you know, side type arrangements. And before you got here, I had asked the question about who kind of looks at these things periodically and comes up with solutions and that. So you know, and I'd gotten some of those answers before. So it's good to hear that you're currently going through that process, because anything that we can do to make the system more efficient, less prone to abuses and you know, some, you know, no one likes to hear the C word, but you know, corruption, because people will shop around and you know, government gets less fees. We get people out there that are getting a competitive advantage because of dishonesty and other things. So it's not good for the overall business kind of you know, realm. And so anything that we can do from the legislative arm and the administrative arm, you know, we should be trying to do. And I guess when I was reading the report, and that just popped out at me as being something that was really, if you're a dishonest and unsavory character, it's like you're at the kind of dining room table with all the fixings. You know.
Any other questions? Mr. Roy?
I guess my question would be to the FS. One of the issues identified in this report is that the government doesn't ensure that the revenues are complete, and particularly identified two areas, which were the tourist accommodation tax and the environmental protection fund. Effectively, what it appears is that this system of collection operates on an honor system, that effectively your tourism accommodation properties, they submit their monthly returns to the Treasury or to Department of Finance. And there's no real testing of the accuracy or completeness of these reports, no inspections to determine that we're getting what should be done. I recall, you know, many moons ago that there used to be a small task force that used to do this sort of thing and visit these premises once in a while to double check. Is there any plan whatsoever to maybe start looking at some of that, just to see if there is at least test some of these things to make sure that they are being reported accurately.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, sir. What I can say to Member Mike Taggart, if I comment specifically on the tourism accommodation tax, I do know that the returns are actually submitted to the Department of Tourism.
Okay.
And
We have invited the chief officer for tourism next week.
Okay. And I know that because we're actually on the same floor, and you see the traffic going on in terms of persons bringing in their returns and so forth. And periodically we do actually we in finance do actually get a few requests asking for, again, waivers of late fees because they haven't paid the tax on time. That has reduced considerably in recent times, and I can't recall seeing one for quite some time. But I do know that the DOT does have inspections of properties, and they do go out and visit. So I know that particular one is fairly well scrutinized. I can't say it makes it 100% foolproof, but I know that there's scrutiny there.
Any other questions? If not, I thank you all, and we have to shift up the calendar a little bit based on commitments by members of the committee. So the next meeting is going to be not next Wednesday, but the following week Wednesday. Somebody look quickly and tell me what date that is, please, before I demonstrate that I don't know how to find it on my computer. Maybe March the 9th, huh? March the 9th. Yeah, tomorrow is a meeting too, but I just, this will continue on March the 10th, actually. The questionings on these reports, on the ones that we did today. And then what we do tomorrow then will be on March the 11th. And the ones we did yesterday, we'll continue those on Wednesday, March the 9th. Thank you all very much. The meeting is adjourned until Wednesday, March the 9th.